Have you ever had a moment, not a dramatic moment, not a moment anyone else in the room would have noticed, where you looked at someone you have loved for most of your life, and something in the quality of that moment stopped you, where time seemed just briefly to hold still? Maybe you were sitting across from them at the kitchen table, in a house that smells the same as it always has, and the light was coming through the window the same way it always does, and everything was familiar and ordinary and unchanged. And yet something in you, something below the level of thought, registered a shift, a change in the texture of the moment, a feeling that you were, without knowing when it began, already in the process of losing someone. Most of us, when we experience something like that, push it away. We tell ourselves we are being morbid. We tell ourselves we are projecting, or worrying too much, or struggling with our own anxiety about aging and death in ways that have nothing to do with what is actually happening in front of us. And sometimes that is true. Sometimes, and this is the thing that keeps so many families from being as present as they could be in the most important season of someone's life. Sometimes that feeling is not anxiety. Sometimes it is recognition. Sometimes the body knows before the mind is ready to accept what it knows, and the feeling you push away is actually the beginning of a kind of wisdom that could serve you and the person you love in ways you cannot yet imagine. Because here is the truth that medicine has confirmed and that generations of nurses, hospice workers, family caregivers, and palliative care physicians have witnessed firsthand. The end of life in old age almost always comes with a preamble. A long, quiet, sometimes very gradual preamble, written in the language of the body, legible to those who know how to read it. The human body does not tend to simply stop without warning. It tends to shift and slow and change and signal over weeks and months, and sometimes over the full length of a year, that it is beginning the process of winding down. And the people who learn to recognize those signals, who allow themselves to understand what they are seeing and to respond to it with presence and love and clear-eyed compassion rather than panic or denial, those people are able to give something to their loved one that cannot be given any other way. The experience of being truly accompanied through the final chapter of their life, not just managed or treated or taken care of, but genuinely, specifically, lovingly accompanied. That is what this conversation is for. Today we are going to walk slowly, carefully, with full attention, through 5 of the most significant signs that tend to appear in the year before an elderly person passes away. Not signs that predict with certainty, because the human body is not a machine and life does not conform to timelines, but signs that carry meaning. Signs that, understood in context, can give you the awareness and the emotional grounding to make the most of whatever time remains. Signs that can shift your experience from being caught off guard to being genuinely present. And that shift, that movement from shock and scrambling to presence and love, is perhaps the greatest gift this knowledge can offer you. We have a great deal to cover, and I want us to take our time, so let us begin. The first sign is one that families almost always encounter, and almost always spend months trying to fight before they allow themselves to understand what it actually means. It is weight loss, not the ordinary, gradual kind of weight change that accompanies aging naturally over many years, not the temporary loss of appetite that comes with a stomach virus or a difficult month or a medication adjustment. What we are talking about is something more persistent and more significant, a sustained, progressive loss of body weight that does not reverse even with the most careful and loving nutritional attention, that has a quality and a trajectory distinct from any weight loss the person has experienced earlier in life. It tends to begin quietly. Families first notice it in small ways. The trousers that always fit well need a belt now. The face has changed, not dramatically, but noticeably in the way the skin rests against the bones, in a new visibility of the jaw and cheekbones and temples. When you hug your father or your mother, You feel something different in your arms, a lightness that was not there before, a fragility that makes you hold on a little more carefully than you used to. The hands, which used to feel warm and solid, feel lighter, the knuckles more prominent, the tendons more visible beneath skin that has begun to lose some of its former fullness. These changes are often gradual enough in their early stages that the family adjusts to each increment without fully registering the accumulation. You notice the trousers and you buy a belt. You notice the hands and you think, he's getting older, he's always been thin. And it is only when you look back at a photograph from a year ago or 2 years ago that you see the change in full, the before and after that had been arriving one quiet day at a time, invisible in its gradualness but unmistakable in retrospect. What is happening in the body during this process is a convergence of several simultaneous biological changes, each of which is significant on its own and together represent a fundamental shift in the body's relationship to the business of sustaining itself. The first of these changes is in the metabolism itself. Across a healthy lifetime, the body's metabolic machinery is continuously performing an extraordinary range of tasks, building and repairing tissue, maintaining organ function, regulating temperature, producing the enzymes and hormones that keep every system in its proper balance. In the final chapter of life, this machinery begins to lose its efficiency. Not all at once, and not dramatically, but measurably. The processes that once ran smoothly and automatically begin to require more effort for less output. Alongside this metabolic shift comes a change in the digestive system that is equally significant. The gut, which has spent a lifetime absorbing nutrients from food with remarkable efficiency, becomes less effective at this work. The enzymes that break food down into its component parts become less abundant. The motility of the intestines, the rhythmic contracting movement that moves food through the digestive tract, slows. The surface area of the intestinal lining, across which nutrients are absorbed into the bloodstream, may be reduced. All of this means that even when an elderly person eats a nutritious, well-prepared meal, the amount of nutrition their body actually extracts from that meal may be significantly less than it appears. The food goes in, but the body is no longer capturing it with the same efficiency it once had. And then there is the appetite itself, which in the final year of life undergoes a change that is more than physical. The hunger that has been one of the most reliable features of being alive, the sensation that has organized the day, motivated the trip to the kitchen, made meals one of the primary pleasures and social experiences of human life, begins to quiet. This quieting is not uniform. There may be days, or even weeks, where the appetite seems relatively normal, where your loved one eats reasonably well, and you allow yourself to feel hopeful. And then it returns, the retreat, the pushing away of the plate, the meal that is more stirred than eaten, the look of someone who is doing their best to comply with what is being offered, but for whom the desire has simply gone somewhere it cannot currently be reached. It is important to understand that this retreat of appetite in the final year of life is not experienced by most elderly people as starvation. It is not the painful, desperate hunger of someone who needs food and cannot access it. It is, more often, a quiet indifference, a shift in the body's signal system such that the drive toward food has simply dimmed. Some elderly people, when asked about it, describe it as a kind of lightness, as though something that was always demanding their attention has stepped back. They are not frightened by it, in most cases. They are simply in a different relationship to food than they have ever been before. For the family, this is one of the hardest things to accept, because food is never just food. Think about what food has meant across this person's life. The meals cooked in the family kitchen, the holiday tables laid with everything that meant celebration and belonging, the cup of tea that meant welcome, the homemade bread that meant love. Food is embedded in every significant memory and every significant relationship. And when someone you love stops wanting it, it can feel like they are pulling away from life itself, from the pleasures and the rituals and the connections that food has always carried. The instinct is fierce and understandable. Cook their favorites, research appetite stimulants, try smaller portions more frequently, add cream and butter to everything to increase the caloric density, order special high nutrition supplements from the pharmacy and encourage, gently and then less gently, that they try just a little more. All of this comes from love, and none of it is wrong. There comes a point in this process, and recognizing when that point has arrived is one of the most important things a family can learn to do, where the goal of increasing intake must give way to a different kind of goal entirely, where the question shifts from how much did they eat to how did the meal feel, where the measure of success is no longer calories consumed, but the quality of presence and warmth and connection that surrounded those 20 minutes at the table. This does not mean ceasing to offer food. It does not mean giving up on sitting together at meal times or making the things they have always loved. It means holding those things with a different intention. Bring them a small bowl of the soup they have always liked, and sit with them while they have however much of it they can manage, and let the conversation or the comfortable silence be as nourishing as the broth. Offer a piece of fruit, slice the way they prefer, and let them take 1 or 2 pieces and leave the rest, and let that be enough. The table is still a place of love, even when the eating is minimal. The presence of food is still meaningful, even when the appetite has retreated. What you are offering now is not primarily nutrition. It is continuity. It is the message that they are still being cared for, still worth the effort of preparation, still held in the warmth of the family's attention. And that message, delivered quietly and without pressure, is received, even when, and perhaps especially when, the words for receiving it are becoming harder to find. Watch also for the physical changes that accompany this weight loss as it progresses. The muscle mass reduces, not just in the arms and legs but throughout the body, including the muscles that support posture, that maintain the upright position, that make the act of sitting in a chair or walking across a room feel stable and safe. As muscle mass reduces, weakness increases, and weakness affects everything. It affects their ability to get up from a seated position without help. It affects their ability to hold utensils and cups and books. It affects their balance, and therefore their safety, and therefore their independence in ways that matter enormously to their dignity and their sense of self. Understanding that this muscle loss is a downstream consequence of the deeper metabolic process at work, rather than something that could be reversed with the right exercise program or the right protein supplement at this stage, allows you to respond to it with practical compassion rather than frustrated intervention. Help them move safely. Modify the environment to reduce fall risk. Bring things to them rather than requiring them to come to things. These adaptations are not defeat. They are wisdom. The second sign, which so often coexists with the first and is driven by many of the same underlying processes, is a fatigue so pervasive and so consistent that it eventually becomes the organizing fact of the person's day. Not tiredness, not sleepiness. Fatigue, the specific, heavy, unrelenting depletion of energy that does not respond to a good night's rest in the way that tiredness does. That is present before any exertion has been undertaken. That makes the smallest of physical demands feel like efforts of enormous proportion. To understand this fatigue, you need to think about where energy comes from and what it is used for in the human body. Energy, at the cellular level, is produced through a process that requires oxygen, glucose, and a complex chain of chemical reactions happening constantly in the mitochondria, the tiny structures inside almost every cell whose sole purpose is to convert fuel into the form of energy the body can actually use. This process is efficient in a healthy body. It runs continuously, without your awareness, producing the energy that powers every heartbeat, every breath, every movement, every thought. And it requires, above all else, adequate blood flow, because blood delivers both the oxygen and the glucose that the mitochondrial machinery needs to function. In the final year of life, blood flow is reduced. The heart, which may be experiencing some degree of failure or simply the accumulated wear of 9 decades of continuous operation, pumps with less force than it once did. The vessels through which blood travels, the arteries and veins and tiny capillaries that reach every corner of the body may be stiffer, narrower, less responsive. The result is that the cells throughout the body are receiving less of the fuel they need to produce energy at their former rate. And the body, with the extraordinary intelligence it has always possessed, responds to this energy deficit by making choices. It prioritizes. It directs the available energy toward the most essential functions and withdraws it from functions that can be sacrificed without immediately threatening survival. The functions that are sacrificed first are the ones that seem, from the outside, most like the person giving up. Physical activity, social engagement, the motivation to get dressed, to move from the bedroom to the living room, to participate in the conversations happening around them. These withdrawals are not choices in the way we usually mean that word. They are not expressions of depression, though depression can coexist with this process and should always be evaluated and addressed. They are biological imperatives, the body's intelligent, if heartbreaking, response to resource scarcity. Imagine for a moment a large and beautiful house, the kind that has been a family home for generations, full of rooms and history and the accumulated furniture and light of many decades of living. Now imagine that the electrical system that powers this house is aging. The wiring is old. The circuits cannot carry what they once could. The power company is delivering less than it used to. And the family living in the house has to make decisions about which rooms to keep lit and which rooms to close off, which appliances to run and which to unplug, how to keep the most essential parts of the house functioning when the power coming in is no longer enough to keep everything running at once. The rooms that get closed off first are the guest rooms, the attic, the spaces that are wonderful to have but not strictly necessary. The lights that stay on are the ones in the kitchen, the bedroom, the bathroom, the most essential spaces. This is what the body is doing when it produces the fatigue that characterizes the final year of life. It is making exactly this kind of triage, moment to moment, directing its limited power toward the rooms that cannot be dark, the heart, the lungs, the brain, and closing off, one by one, the rooms that are wonderful but not strictly necessary. The room of physical energy, the room of social engagement, the room of motivation and drive and the pleasure of movement. These rooms go dark not because the person has stopped valuing what happened in them, but because the power is needed elsewhere. What does all of this mean for the person living through this fatigue? It means that their world necessarily becomes smaller. The range of activities they can engage in diminishes. The time they spend upright and moving and actively participating in the life of the household reduces. They spend more time in bed or in their chair. They sleep more, or at least lie with their eyes closed more, though the sleep they get may be lighter and less restorative than it appears. They participate in conversation in shorter bursts, with longer rests in between. They may begin to decline invitations, to family meals, to visits from friends, to outings they once would have looked forward to, not because they no longer love the people involved or no longer value those experiences, but because the energy required to participate has simply become more than they currently have to spend. For the family, this contraction of the person's world can be difficult to witness and difficult to accept. There may be a temptation to push, to encourage activity, to insist on a walk, even a short one, to bring visitors anyway and hope that the stimulation will lift the energy rather than drain it. And occasionally, in the earlier stages of this process, some gentle encouragement can help. But as the fatigue deepens and becomes more consistent, the most loving and effective response is not encouragement but adaptation. Bring the world to them rather than bringing them to the world. Sit with them in their room rather than asking them to come to the living room. Keep visits shorter and more frequent rather than longer and more effortful. Understand that 20 minutes of your genuine, undivided presence, sitting quietly, holding a hand, talking about something small and ordinary, or saying nothing at all, may be worth more to them and more sustainable for them than a 2-hour family gathering that leaves them exhausted for 2 days afterward. Pay attention also to what they still have energy for and protect those things fiercely. There are almost always specific things that seem to spark a brief rally, a particular piece of music, a visit from a specific person, a conversation about a subject they care deeply about, the presence of an animal, the sensation of being outside in fresh air for a few minutes. These sparks are precious. They are windows. They are moments when the house lights up briefly in a room that has been mostly dark, and you can see, for a moment, everything that has always been there. Do not schedule those moments to death. Do not over-engineer them. Simply be attentive to what they are, and when they arise, be present for them completely. The third sign takes us into the territory that is perhaps the most difficult of all to witness, because it involves the loss not of physical strength, but of cognitive and emotional presence. The slow, gathering dimming of the mind that in the final year of life can feel, to the family around it, like losing the person before you have lost the person. Cognitive decline in the final stage of life is distinct from, though often overlapping with, the cognitive changes of earlier stages of dementia or Alzheimer's disease. It is driven by many of the same factors we have already discussed: reduced blood flow to the brain, changes in brain chemistry, the accumulated effects of diminished sleep and nutrition and oxygenation. And it presents in ways that range from subtle and intermittent to profound and consistent. In the early weeks and months of this process, the changes may be easy to explain away. A little more forgetfulness than usual, names that slip, dates that blur, the thread of a conversation that loses itself more easily than it once did. A little more confusion at the end of the day in the phenomenon that caregivers call sundowning, where orientation and clarity diminish in the afternoon and evening in ways that are often noticeably worse than in the morning. A little more difficulty with tasks that require sequencing, following a recipe, operating a familiar device, navigating a routine that has not changed in years but suddenly feels unclear. These early changes are real, but they are subtle enough that families typically absorb them without fully reckoning with what they represent. You make small accommodations. You repeat information more often. You simplify choices. You take over tasks that were once done independently. And because each accommodation seems small and reasonable in isolation, you do not necessarily register that you are making more and more of them, or that each one represents the body's concession of a territory that once belonged to the person's autonomy. As the decline progresses, the changes become harder to explain away. There may be episodes of disorientation that are startling in their completeness, moments when your loved one does not know where they are, does not recognize familiar surroundings, looks around a room they have lived in for decades with the uncertain eyes of someone who has never been there before. There may be moments when they do not recognize people they love, and I want to pause on this one, because it is so painful and so important to understand correctly. When an elderly person in the final year of life looks at a beloved family member and does not recognize their face, the family member experiences this as a devastating loss, as being erased from the relationship, as no longer existing for the person they love. And the pain of that experience is real and valid and deserves acknowledgement. But the neurological reality of what is happening is more nuanced than it appears. What the person has often lost is the conscious recognition, the ability to match the face in front of them to the stored representation in their memory and produce a name and a relationship. What they have often not lost, and this is supported by research into the neuroscience of memory and emotion, is the felt sense of that person, the emotional resonance, the automatic response of the nervous system to the presence of someone with whom they share deep attachment. In practical terms, this means that your loved one may look at you without recognition and still feel safe in your presence. They may not know that you are their daughter or their son, and still relax when you come into the room. They may not have access to your name, and still respond to the sound of your voice with something that, in the language of the body, is unmistakably welcome. The love is still there. It has simply moved below the level of conscious recognition, into a deeper layer of the nervous system that persists long after the surface functions of memory and language have begun to fail. Find them there. Reach them there. And do not require them to meet you at the level of recognition that they can no longer reliably access. The emotional life of someone in cognitive decline during the final year is often more intense and less filtered than it was earlier. Without the cognitive overlay that usually moderates emotional expression, the social awareness, the self-regulation, the ability to contextualize feelings and decide how much to show, emotions can surface quickly, vividly, and sometimes without apparent external cause. Tears may come unpredictably. Anxiety may spike in situations that would not previously have been distressing. Moments of intense and complete seeming joy may appear unexpectedly and be gone just as quickly. And there may be, in some people, a depth of tenderness and expressiveness that was not present earlier in life, as though the cognitive structures that once kept feeling at a manageable distance have loosened, and what remains is something raw and present and completely real. Approach all of this with patience and warmth. Do not correct. Do not argue. Do not attempt to restore them to a reality that is no longer accessible to them. Enter their reality instead. Ask questions about what they are thinking and feeling and experiencing, and listen to the answers not as symptoms to be managed, but as communications from a person who is still very much there, still trying to connect, still reaching for the relationship even when the usual pathways for doing so have become unreliable. You will find them if you keep reaching. They are still there. The fourth sign is one that tends to generate a particular kind of anguish in families, because it looks, so persistently, like something that should be fixable. Frequent infections that do not resolve the way they should, and wounds that refuse to heal with the speed and completeness that they once would have. These are the signs of an immune system that is no longer operating at capacity. That is, like so many of the body's systems in the final year of life, making difficult choices about where to direct its diminishing resources. The immune system, in the fullness of its function, is one of the most complex and extraordinary systems in the human body. It involves hundreds of different types of cells, white blood cells of many varieties, each with specialized functions, each able to communicate with the others through a sophisticated chemical signaling network that spans the entire body. It involves organs dedicated to immune function: the spleen, the lymph nodes, the thymus. It involves the mucosal surfaces of the respiratory and digestive tracts, lined with their own immune cells, and the protective layer of microorganisms that help keep pathogens from gaining a foothold. It involves the skin itself, the first line of defense, with its own complement of immune cells monitoring every centimeter of its surface. Maintaining all of this at full operational capacity requires enormous energy and biological resources. And in the final year of life, as those resources diminish, the immune system, like everything else, must prioritize and pull back. The result is a system that can still respond to threats, but not with the speed and force and completeness that it once could. Pathogens that would once have been cleared within days are now able to establish themselves more deeply and persist longer. Infections that were once straightforward to treat become recurring, cycling through apparent resolution and return in ways that are exhausting for the person experiencing them, heartbreaking for their family, and genuinely difficult for the medical team trying to manage them. Urinary tract infections are among the most common of these recurring infections in elderly people, particularly in women, and in the final year of life, they take on a character that distinguishes them from the urinary tract infections of earlier years. They may not present with the typical symptoms of burning and urgency and frequency. Instead, they may manifest primarily as a sudden worsening of confusion, an increased disorientation, a spike in agitation or restlessness that has no other obvious cause. Families and caregivers who know to watch for this, who understand that behavioral change in an elderly person can be the primary presentation of an infection rather than the classic physical symptoms, are able to respond more quickly and more effectively. But equally important is understanding that treating the infection in the final year of life may improve these symptoms temporarily without addressing the underlying vulnerability that allowed the infection to take hold in the first place. The infection will return, and the question the family must eventually sit with is not how to prevent every recurrence, but how to ensure that the person's comfort and dignity are maintained through whatever course this process takes. Respiratory infections, pneumonia, bronchitis, the persistent coughs that settle into the chest and do not fully clear, follow a similar pattern. The lungs, which may already be functioning with some degree of compromise due to the changes in breathing that we will discuss when we reach our fifth sign, are less able to mount an effective local immune response. The cough reflex, which is one of the lung's primary defenses against infection, may have weakened. The mucociliary clearance system, the network of tiny hair-like structures that line the airways and sweep debris and pathogens upward and out, functions less vigorously. And so respiratory infections establish themselves more easily, persist longer, and are more likely to progress to pneumonia in elderly people in the final year of life than in any other population. Wound healing tells a parallel and equally important story. The skin of an elderly person in the final year of life has already changed significantly. It is thinner, drier, less elastic, with a reduced capacity to generate new cells at the rate needed to repair damage quickly. When circulation is also compromised, as it is when the heart is not pumping as strongly as it once did, the skin receives less blood flow, and with it less oxygen and fewer of the cellular building blocks needed for repair. A small cut that would have been fully healed within a week in earlier years may still be open and fragile 3 weeks later. A pressure sore, the result of sustained pressure on skin that is already receiving inadequate circulation, may develop rapidly and resist all efforts at healing despite excellent nursing care. Managing these wounds in the final year of life requires a shift in perspective that is similar to the shift we discussed in relation to infections. The goal is no longer to achieve the fastest possible healing in the way that goal would have been understood 5 or 10 years earlier. The goal is to prevent the wound from becoming a source of infection or significant pain, to keep it clean and protected, to ensure that the skin around it is as healthy as it can be, and to do all of this in a way that causes the minimum possible discomfort to the person whose skin and whose body and whose dignity are at the center of everything. Comfort first. Always comfort first. What families need most, when they are in the midst of managing the recurring infections and slow healing wounds of the final year, is not a more aggressive medical strategy. It is a frank and compassionate conversation with the medical team about what the realistic goals of treatment are at this stage, what benefits and burdens each intervention carries, and how to align the care being provided with what the person themselves values and wants for this time in their life. These conversations can be initiated by families. You do not have to wait for a doctor to raise the subject of goals of care. You can ask for that conversation directly, and asking for it is one of the most powerful things you can do as an advocate for someone you love. The fifth and final sign is the one that arrives in most cases closest to the end, and it is the one that is most visible, most unmistakable, and in the most literal sense, the most breathtaking. The changes in breathing and circulation that mark the body's final preparations are the sign that most families, when they look back, identify as the moment when they understood, fully and without any remaining ambiguity, that they were in the last chapter, not because they are always dramatic, but because they have a quality, a specific, quiet, unmistakable quality that distinguishes them from everything that has come before. The breathing changes begin, as so much of what we have discussed today begins subtly. There may be moments during sleep when you notice a pause, a beat of silence in the rhythm of the breath that is slightly longer than feels comfortable. You notice it, and it ends, and you tell yourself you imagined it, or that it was nothing, and you go back to what you were doing. But you noticed it. And over the days and weeks that follow, you notice it again, and more often, and the pauses lengthen, and the breathing between the pauses becomes more variable. Sometimes faster, sometimes slower, sometimes shallow and sometimes deeper, as though the respiratory system is searching for a pattern that is comfortable and not quite finding one. What is happening physiologically is a change in the brain's regulation of breathing. The respiratory center, a cluster of neurons in the brainstem whose job it is to monitor the oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the blood and issue the continuous, unconscious command to breathe, is receiving altered signals and responding with altered patterns. As blood oxygen levels shift and blood chemistry changes in ways that accompany the slowing of the cardiovascular system, the brainstem adjusts its commands accordingly. The result is breathing that is no longer the smooth, regular, automatic rhythm of a body operating at full capacity, but something more variable, more searching, more clearly the work of a system that is doing its best with resources that are no longer what they were. One of the most significant of these altered patterns is what medicine calls Cheyne-Stokes respiration, a cyclical pattern in which a period of gradually deepening breaths, sometimes becoming quite rapid and full, is followed by a period of apnea, of complete cessation of breathing, before the cycle begins again. The apneic periods, the silences, can last 10 seconds, 20 seconds, sometimes close to a minute, and for anyone sitting in the room, watching and listening, those silences carry an enormous weight. Each one arrives as an interruption, a suspension of the normal order of things, a held breath in the observer that mirrors, unknowingly, the held breath of the person in the bed. And each time the breathing resumes, sometimes gently, sometimes with a deeper intake that sounds almost like a gasp of surprise, there is a release in the room that is followed almost immediately by the awareness that another silence is coming. Learning to sit through these silences is one of the most significant things you can do as a caregiver and as a loving presence in this final time. It requires practice. It requires the active, conscious decision to receive the silence as part of a natural process rather than as a crisis requiring intervention. It requires trusting what the medical team has told you about what the person is and is not experiencing. And what the research consistently shows is that a person in the Cheyne-Stokes breathing pattern is typically not experiencing distress. Their brain, operating with diminished oxygen and in a state of profoundly reduced consciousness, is not registering the pauses the way you are registering them from the outside. They are not aware of each silence as a threat. They are, in many cases, already in a state that is closer to deep unconsciousness than to anything we would recognize as wakefulness. The circulation changes tell their own story, visible in the body's surface and tangible to the hand. As the heart's output decreases, as the pump that has been beating without pause for 80 or 90 years begins to lose some of its force, the body implements a preservation strategy that prioritizes blood flow to the organs that sustain life above all others: the heart itself, the brain, the kidneys. To maintain adequate perfusion of these central organs with diminishing cardiac output, the body reduces blood flow to the periphery, to the hands and feet and legs, to the skin, to the muscles, to everything that lies outside the innermost circle of survival. The result of this redistribution is visible and palpable. Touch your loved one's feet, they will be cool, in a specific, settled way that is different from the coolness of a cold room. Touch their hands the same. The coolness travels upward over hours and days slowly as the circulation pulls further and further inward. The skin changes color in ways that can be striking. There may be a generalized pallor, a grayness or yellowish cast, that gives the skin a quality entirely different from its former warmth. In specific areas, the knees, the ankles, the heels, the fingers, the lips, there may appear a mottled, blotchy pattern of purplish and pale skin that physicians call livedo reticularis, which is the visible surface evidence of blood that is moving sluggishly or pooling in the small capillaries beneath the skin, rather than flowing continuously through them. These changes in skin color and temperature are not painful. They are not emergencies. They are landmarks, physical markers on the road of the body's final journey, telling you, if you know how to read them, where on that road you currently are. Some families, when they see them for the first time, call the doctor or the hospice nurse in a panic, and that is entirely understandable. But the response you will typically receive from the medical team is not a prescription for a new treatment. It is a gentle, informed explanation of what you are seeing and what it means, which is that the body is doing exactly what bodies do at this stage, and that your role now is not to intervene but to be present. There is often a sound in the final days that accompanies the breathing and that many families find deeply distressing to hear. It is a rattling, gurgling quality, a sound like something loose in the throat or the chest, that comes from secretions in the upper airway that the person can no longer clear by swallowing or coughing. This sound, which has been called many things over the centuries, and which is now sometimes referred to in clinical settings simply as the terminal respiratory secretion, is almost invariably more distressing to the people in the room than to the person producing it. The person, at the stage when this sound is present, is typically so deeply unconscious that they are not experiencing the secretions as a sensation requiring management. But the sound, raw, rattling, unmistakable, can be among the most difficult things a family has ever listened to. There are practical things that can help. Repositioning, sometimes quite gently, a small change in the angle of the head, a slight shift to one side can sometimes change the sound significantly by altering where the secretions pool. Keeping the mouth moist with a small sponge swab, careful not to introduce water that cannot be swallowed, can provide some comfort. Medications can sometimes be prescribed by the hospice team to reduce the production of secretions. None of these interventions will eliminate the sound entirely, and none of them need to. The goal is not silence. The goal is comfort, and the comfort of someone in the final hours of life is served not primarily by medical management, but by the presence of the people who love them. Because this is the truth at the center of everything we have discussed today. In the final hours, there is very little left that medicine can add. There is almost no limit to what love can add. Your presence, the specific warmth and weight of you in the room, the sound of your voice, familiar and beloved, Reading something aloud or simply speaking whatever comes is irreplaceable. Hearing is one of the last senses to diminish. This is not a comforting story told to grieving families. This is a physiological fact, supported by the understanding of how the auditory cortex and the brainstem continue to process sound even as other regions of the brain go quiet. Your voice reaches them. Speak to them. Tell them who is in the room. Tell them they are loved. Tell them if it is true and if it needs to be said. And sometimes it does need to be said. Because some people hold on because they do not feel they have permission to let go, that they have lived well, that the people they love will carry them forward, that they do not have to fight any longer, that it is all right, that it is all right. As we arrive now at the close of this conversation, this long, full, deeply human conversation about the final year of life, I want to hold with you, for a moment, the full weight of what we have covered together. The weight loss that tells you the body is beginning to withdraw from the demands of sustaining itself. The fatigue that tells you the body is rationing its remaining resources with increasing urgency. The cognitive changes that tell you the mind is beginning its own quieter process of departure. The recurring infections and slow-healing wounds that tell you the body's defenses are stepping back from their long work. And the changes in breathing and circulation that tell you the final transition is near. 5 signs, 5 languages in which the body speaks in the final year of life. And learning to understand these languages, rather than fearing them, rather than fighting what they say, rather than looking away from what they are telling you, is one of the most profound acts of love available to anyone who has someone to lose. Because this knowledge does not just serve you, it serves them. Every time you resist the urge to push food that their body no longer wants, every time you let them rest when their body is telling them to rest, every time you enter their confusion with gentleness instead of correction, every time you choose comfort over intervention when intervention can no longer change the outcome, every time you sit in the silence of a room where someone you love is dying and choose to be fully, completely, undistractedly present, you are loving them in the most precise and specific and irreplaceable way that this moment allows. You are giving them not the love you wish you could give, the love that could fix this and turn back time and restore everything to what it was. You are giving them the love that is actually available in this actual moment, which is the love of clear eyes and steady hands and a heart that stays open even when opening is painful. That love, that specific, present, clear-eyed love, is the thing that endures, not just in memory, though it will live there, but in the person who gave it, in the way you understand yourself after this is over to have shown up, in the knowledge which no one can take from you that when it mattered most, you were there, fully there, and you were not afraid. If today's conversation gave you something meaningful, an insight that clarified something you have been trying to understand, a feeling of being less alone in what you are walking through, a perspective that will change how you show up for someone you love, please share that with us in the comments below. Tell us what resonated. Tell us about the person you are thinking of. Tell us what you are carrying. This community is built on exactly this kind of honesty, and your words matter more than you know. Please share this video with anyone in your life who is walking this road. Like it so that more people can find it. Subscribe to our channel so that when the next conversation arrives, and there will be a next conversation, because there is always more that needs to be said about the things that matter most, you will be there. And know, as you go from this video back into your life and back to the people who need you, that you are not alone in this. None of us is. We are all in some way at some stage in the presence of the same great truth. And the only sane and loving response to that truth is exactly what you are already doing. Showing up, paying attention, staying present, loving without condition. That is everything. That has always been everything.